Okay, I'm not going to be nervous. I'm not going to be nervous. I'm not going to be nervous. Did you guess it? Yep, that's what we're talking today. We're going to talk today on Take 2 about anxiety. Nope, and we're not going to be nervous because Scripture tells us there are things we can lean upon with God and in Scripture to help us through anxiety. So Do Not Be Anxious is the title of our show today on Take 2 with Jerry and Debbie. I'm Debbie Georgiani along with Jerry Usher. We do have a special guest with us this whole entire hour, and I think you're really going to love it. But you, dear listener, you drive the show. So we're going to be talking about anxiety today, about being anxious, worrisome, trepidatious, any of the being apprehensive, having agitation, any of the feelings that keep us paralyzed, that keep us from really moving closer to God. Or maybe those feelings actually help us get closer to God. So we're going to explore all the different angles of it, but we need to hear from you at 1-800-585-9396. Whew, Jerry, I did it. I wasn't nervous.
Well, thank you, Debbie. And yeah, we are going to be talking about anxiety today, and this can be to greater or lesser degrees in certain people. Debbie, you and I have both had periods in our lives where we went through pretty severe anxiety, and our guest today did as well. And what we're going to be talking about, dear listeners, with your help, is this whole idea of being anxious and how this can really, as Debbie said, I think you used the correct word there, Debbie, is it can sometimes paralyze us. And I know I've been in a spot in my life before where just to go out of the house to go to the grocery store took quite an act of the will and of courage. And so if any of you are going through anxiety, if you struggle with fears about what tomorrow is going to bring, or things just aren't going to go well, or you're going to lose your job, or if you just have these fears, these anxieties, God doesn't want that in our lives. Sometimes He permits that. And so let's have a conversation about this today, and hopefully, Debbie, we can bring some peace and relief to people who are going through this. 1-800-585-9396.
And there's all different levels of anxiety. You know, we have the things that just, like Jerry, you shared, that maybe just pop up if something's happening in our life and it kind of takes over those fears and those worries about the future. Or maybe it's really chronic and we've get those repetitive loops in our brains that just can't stop, and the anxiety really is debilitating. And that definitely requires professional assistance and medical help because, like you said, Jerry, God doesn't want this for us. He wants us to be free from it and have peace and to have hope. And certainly we, Jerry and myself and our guest, we're not trained professionals in this area. However, we've lived through, like Jerry said, some serious bouts of anxiety. And it's going to be interesting to see how we all deal with it. And I think it could help each other. So we're already starting to get the calls. That means you have a lot to say on this subject. That's a good thing. But there's open lines. So we want you to dial in right now. And you can listen live while you're waiting on hold. So you're not going to miss a thing at 1-800-585-9396.
Yeah, and our guest today is a familiar presence on Catholic radio and TV and at parishes and conferences around the United States and Canada. His name is Gary Zimac. He's a dynamic Catholic speaker. He's an author, recognized as one of the leading figures in the new evangelization. He's led thousands of people closer to Christ, and he's got his own pretty amazing story about how anxiety has played a role in his life. Gary, thank you for joining us here on Take 2 with Jerry and Debbie.
Oh, it's so great to be with you, Jerry. Thanks so much for having me on.
You're welcome. And again, an invitation for those of you to call in today. This could be a very weighty, very serious matter that some people deal with. And as Debbie pointed out, we're coming at this more from just a real life angle. We cannot give you professional advice or counseling or therapy or anything, but we all have tasted this, and it's a bitter chalice to drink from sometimes. And if you're going through this, please give us a call. Gary really is quite well read in this area. 1-800-585-9396. But Gary, as we talked about, there can be no better teacher than life itself, and you've got your own story to tell about anxiety.
Yeah, I sure do, Jerry. And when you were mentioning about going out of the house, I can so relate to that. My battle with anxiety started when I was very young. When I was a young child, maybe about 7 years old, I was worried about all kinds of things. My parents would die. I would get beat up in school. I wouldn't do good in school. So many different things. I just worried constantly. And eventually what happened was that anxiety manifested itself in several physical symptoms, including all kinds of stomach issues. And then when I was in my 20s, what started to happen is I began to experience panic attacks. And on at least 5 occasions, I had to go to the ER because I swore that I was having a heart attack. And Jerry, I remember so many times, I would be in a store. I would be standing in line at a store, and I'd start to feel my heart flutter. And I would literally have to leave the store thinking that I'm going to die. So this is how serious it was for me. And this went on for many, many years. And I was really unhappy. I was also an incredibly lukewarm Catholic. Went to Mass every Sunday, but I really didn't have a good relationship with Jesus. That all changed. I would say about 2004. I had an incredibly strong conversion experience. And it's amazing what happened then. I started to realize that once I got to know Jesus personally, I would walk with him every day. And guys, this is not a cliche. I really mean this. I walk with him every day. I mean the Lord talk. All of a sudden, I started to feel peace. And I am now more peaceful than I ever have been, but I'm still prone to anxiety. I realize that. I'm prone to be a worrier. But one day at a time, with the Lord's help, I'm very peaceful now. And I am blessed right now to be the leading Catholic speaker on overcoming anxiety. I don't know how this happened. It's kind of amazing how the Lord can use me. But I always tell people when I go out, and I lead parish missions dealing with anxiety. I'm leading a retreat in a couple of weeks at the Malvern Retreat House in Philadelphia about anxiety. I always tell people, Google Catholic speaker anxiety and see who comes up. So the Lord's given me this mission, and I am pleased to be able to bring peace into the lives of so many who, like me, suffer with this tendency toward anxiety.
Gary, I come from a long family history of worriers, so I can relate to what you're talking about. And it's very natural for me to worry. It's unnatural for me to kind of just let things go and feel at peace even when you're in the midst of the storm. I have to work at that. But the interesting thing when I hear you talking, and I can relate on so many levels, and I've read some of your books, and I've actually listened to you for quite some time. It's interesting, and I was kind of making light of it, if you will, at the beginning of the show, of joking around saying, okay, I'm not going to be nervous. But the truth of the matter is, though, Gary, it really does take an act of the will, because I know that there are times, and tell me if you think this is absolutely just off the wall, but there are times that I have said, okay, Deb, you're going to take a week off of worrying. You're going to just take a week off. You're just going to check out and not worry for a week. And I've actually been able to not worry for a long stretch. And it really was quite healing. And all it took was for me to actually make that statement and to give myself permission to take a break from the natural thing that came so easily to me. Is that even possible? I know I've done it for many years, but I'm just wondering, is it a mind game I'm playing, or is it really working?
No, I totally agree with you, Debbie. And in fact, when I go out and I speak, I often tell people, well, this isn't going to be too popular, but I have to tell you the truth. You can choose to not worry. We can't control our emotions. So in other words, and this to me is a very freeing statement. This is something that St. Francis de Sales said his quote is, we should not fear fear, because I can't not make myself feel afraid. I can't make the butterflies in my stomach go away. But what I can do is choose not to worry. And that's really what I focus on. I tell people, don't focus on your emotions. Focus on what you do with those emotions. So when you're afraid, Debbie, you and I, we have this tendency toward anxiety. Mm-hmm. What we can do when we begin to worry, instead of worrying, is maybe open up our Bible, say some prayers, go to daily Mass, spend time in Eucharistic adoration. These are things we can do. Instead of worrying, we can focus on the Lord. Now, that doesn't make the feelings always go away, because sometimes I'll be praying and I'll still feel a little queasy in my stomach. But here's what I have learned, is that the closer you get to Jesus, and the more you do this, the more you walk with him every day, eventually your fear is going to decrease. But I can't do that on my own. That's the Lord doing that. But I can not worry. That is something that I can do. And yeah, it's an act of the will.
Beautiful.
Take Two with Jerry and Debbie, and Gary Zimac is our guest today. He is a leading speaker and author, and from life experience knows a little bit about anxiety, and that's what we're talking about today. Do you kind of have this dread that comes over you when you think about certain things? Maybe even when you go to bed at night and you just carry all those worries with you to bed, and you can't sleep at night. How do you maybe work around that particular difficulty? Or maybe the moment you put your feet on the floor in the morning, you think, wow, things are just going to go horribly today. Or if you've overcome anxiety, if you found ways to deal with this yourself, you could really make a difference in people's lives. 1-800-585-9396. Michelle and Rebecca and the others on the line, we will get to you here in just a few minutes. But Gary, if you had to boil this down, just say if you had to pull out one piece of advice out of all that you give in your books and your talks to someone who's struggling with anxiety, what would that be?
I would really say don't be overcome by your feelings. That feeling of fear, don't let that distract you. Just turn to the Lord, focus on Him. And Jerry, it's really pretty simple. And people have asked me, well, how do I get this personal relationship with Jesus started? Just tell Him, Lord, please take over my life for me. And that's what I find to be very effective. So many times people are distraught about their feelings, and they think, well, my faith is so horrible, it's a sin. I'm worried there's something wrong. Well, no, your feelings are your feelings. The church teaches that emotions, they're not right or wrong. What matters is what you do with those feelings.
That's very interesting. I'd love to explore more about the feelings of that, because I do think it's easy for us to give in to those feelings and to let them guide us. And especially in this day and age, I really do. So I would love to explore a little bit more about that. But we are going to hit the pause button in just a few seconds. We're going to take that break. And when we come back, we're going to start going to the phones. Michelle, you're going to be first up in Buffalo, New York. But there is room for you, dear listeners. If you'd like to talk to Gary Zimac, he's great. He's wonderful to talk to. I've talked to him. I love talking to him. So call in at 1-800-585-9396. The title of the show today is Do Not Be Anxious. We're talking about anxiety. If you suffer from it, if you have an experience of it, if you want to share your take, call in. But stay with us on Take Two. We'll be right back.
Children don't learn their identity from a mirror. When they're first born, they learn right away by looking at mom and dad. I am precious. I'm worth dying for. And if you're adopted, you learn that from your adopted parents. Somehow we get it in our heads that we can increase our value by our accomplishments, that we can lose our worth through sin. I don't love my kids because of what they do. I love them because they're mine. I'm stuck with them. They're stuck with me. God loves us for the same reason. Isaiah 43, you are mine. He thinks we're precious, worth dying for, and no act of grace or sin can change that. As you strive to be all you can, don't forget who you are.
This is Chris Stefanik. Complete coverage of World Youth Day 2016 from Krakow starts July 27th, only on EWTN, the Global Catholic Network.
From the archives, this is the wisdom of Mother Angelica.
Do not let your heart be troubled. Is your heart troubled? Well, what about? Well, I have my children are not in the church. We've had tragedy after tragedy in our family. This one is a born loser, never been successful in his life. This one has terrible pain. All that. So who knows Jesus? And yet our dear Lord looks at us with great love as only a friend can, a real friend, and say, don't let your hearts be troubled. Now I want you to think of that. He's saying, don't let it. Now that means you can do something about it, doesn't it, huh? He doesn't say, I'm going to help you not to let your hearts be troubled. No, he said, you don't let it trouble you.
For more about Mother Angelica, visit EWTNRC.com.
All right, busy phone lines. We're going to go right to your calls. Take two with Jerry and Debbie. Our guest is Gary Zimac. We're talking about anxiety today. And if you have any issues, anxiety, panic attacks, things like this, we can talk through this. Again, we cannot dispense professional therapeutic advice or anything like that, but we have all had our own experiences of this. And so I do believe that life's experiences and our own struggles and challenges do equip us to have a conversation about this. So as Debbie said, we're going to start with Michelle in Buffalo, listening to EWTN Radio on the Station of the Cross. Hi, Michelle. You're on with Gary Zimac.
Hi, how are you?
Good, Michelle. How are you?
Good. Really, I just wanted to call and share because my worry that I was having, actually, it's been something of the past, it's actually been something I kind of been overcome in the past 5 years. And very similar to Gary, I was kind of that lukewarm Catholic my whole life. You know, I would always go to Sunday Mass, would go to confession maybe once or twice a year. And I thought I was good in my faith. And then I started, when my son was born, I developed OCD, like really horrible OCD. And it started from one night when I was exhausted and I didn't want to go check on him at night because I was so tired. I had sleep deprivation. And all of a sudden I had this fear that I was being a lazy mom. And if I was lazy and didn't want to go check on him, that God was going to take him away from me. And it was at that point that I really just started developing all these little OCD things. Like I would have to check and see him breathe 7 times before I left his room. And he had this spot on the carpet that when I left his room and I would close the door, I had to drag my foot against this stain on the carpet. And then every day something got worse and worse. Like I would have to check my alarm clock. I'd have to check. It just became this horrible thing. And then I would hide it from people. And I remember staring at myself in the mirror saying, you're bigger than this and stronger than this, snap out of it. But I just couldn't. And it was horrific. It went on for about, I would say 3 years, or 2.5, maybe 3 years. And then I'll never forget, we were leaving for a trip to Florida one year, and I'm terrified to fly. And we were sitting in Mass, and one of our visiting priests was in, and he was giving a homily on worry. And it was, I think it was Timothy was the second reading that he was mentioning. And he talked about how if worry put money in your bank account, then go ahead and worry. And if worry shoveled snow out of your driveway, then go ahead and worry. But worry doesn't do any of those things. Worry simply makes the present more difficult. And God has every hair on your head counted. So you don't need to worry because he's got it all under control. And I remember kind of that homily resonating with me, and I was like kind of pondering it for a little bit. And then we left for our trip to Florida, and terrified to fly. We got there, safe and sound. And it was one morning, my husband was still sleeping, but my son and I were up. And my son went in to go give my husband a kiss. And when he went to leave the room, I saw him drag his foot against the carpet as he closed the door. And I thought, holy cats, he's picking up on my crazy, thinking that's normal. And I've never been one of those people to make a bargain with God ever. But I sat there and I thought, this could be like, Lord, if you just get me home safely, I will knock this OCD thing. I promise, just get me home. And I will tell you, that was actually my reversion story. That's actually where the start of where God then started touching my life. And I always say it's like he placed his hands on me and he healed me, because it was that moment that he knew I couldn't do it on my own. And he made, every promise he made to me came true. And I just started to know who he was more and have a relationship with him. And I know it sounds cliche, but I think Gary said this, I walk with the Lord every day, and he just makes it easier through that, because I just let go and I just gave it all to him.
Wow. Gary, your thoughts on Michelle? This is an amazing story.
Michelle, thank you for sharing that. What a great story. You nailed it when you said you realize that you can't do this alone. One of the things I always like to point out, and this comforts me a great deal when I speak, I point this out, is that St. Paul would boast of his weakness, because he said, when I'm weak, then I'm strong. When I'm weak, I realize I need the Lord. And one of the great blessings in my life has been my anxiety, because it's made me realize that. And I think you've come to the same conclusion. But, boy, what a great story, the way you fought through that. You did what you could, and you made that decision. Yeah, I'm going to try to do what I can to overcome this, but that led you to the Lord, who really did the heavy lifting. So, that is just perfect. Great job. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
One thing I just wanted to add, Gary and Michelle, if you're still listening, when Michelle brought up about after having a child that the OCD started to kick in, I've heard this actually a lot of times, Gary, about the fact that when a person is caring for another person, is in charge for another person that is definitely fully dependent on them, and that's what a child is, that a lot of times these repetitive loops, this OCD with this along with this heavy responsibility, it comes into play much more often. I know it affected me when I shared it on one of the shows. Like my first child, I would sterilize the bottles like crazy because I thought, oh my goodness, if there's one germ, this baby's going to die. And the second child, it's amazing that he survived. I hardly sterilized anything. And it's amazing how when you first have this great responsibility, these things can trigger. Can you talk a little bit about that? Like, what are the trigger things that make anxiety rise?
Yeah, I can so relate to that because my wife and I are blessed to have 18-year-old twin girls. They weren't supposed to be born alive, and they were born 3 months premature. So I totally get that sterilization thing and the hand washing. And I remember obsessing about the girls' health. And you can take it to the point where it can overtake you, and it can almost become OCD-like. And I think the first step is to recognize that these things can happen, and oftentimes it could be a biological condition, it can be an external set of circumstances, but I think the key is what Michelle talked about repeatedly, this walk with the Lord. Just be aware. I mean, today's gospel, Debbie, it's unbelievable.
Right.
Jesus said, "Come to me, all you who labor and are burdened, and I will give you rest." What a great deal. I mean, what a great offer. He's telling us right there, come to me, turn to me today, and I'll give you rest. Well, I'll tell you what, as an anxious person by nature, that sounds very attractive to me. And that walk with him every day is what really gives us that peace. I don't think, and this is just my opinion, I don't think that my tendency to be anxious is ever going to go away, but I can manage it every day with the Lord's help. And I'm more peaceful now than I ever have been, but I still have that tendency. And like you, I tend to be a worrier by nature, and I got to catch myself when I start to fall into the bad habit again.
Right. But I love what Michelle had to say, where she said she just gave it over. That was that act of the will. She gave it over to the Lord, and that act really benefited her greatly. Wow. Great story. Michelle, thank you so much for imparting your life story. It helped so many of us, and we really appreciate it. God bless you, and thanks for taking time out of your day to call in.
Yeah, thank you, Michelle. We're going to go to Rebecca next in Amarillo, Texas, listening to EWTN Radio on St. Valentine Radio. Rebecca, we got about 2 minutes before a break. We can't move, so if we get to that point, we'll just continue on the other side of the break. So go ahead, Rebecca. Welcome to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie and Gary Zimac.
Oh, thank you so very much. I'm blessed to be able to call in today. I do have a question for you. Back in 2008, my mother passed away, and that seemed to trigger a lot in me. My anxiety started. I was diagnosed with several different diseases, and it kept on, and it progressively started to get worse. Well, in this past year, in 2015, in October, I was on my deathbed. I had a hematoma on my left kidney, and I was bleeding out. I had an experience to where I seen my mom, and I felt our Heavenly Father. I knew He was there. I seen my mom, and it was an out-of-body experience, something that I could never forget. At that moment, it took all my anxiety away.
Wow.
It took all my worries. It took all my pain away. Now, it's taken me, I'm not fully recovered yet, but it's taken me a long time to recover from that. For a while, my anxiety wasn't there. I wasn't worried for a while. And then my anxiety came back because I had this feeling of, I don't want to go through that again. I don't want to go through that pain again. But I want to experience not feeling the anxiety anymore. Now, my question is there a certain prayer or a certain saint that I can pray to that can help me with that?
We'll tell you what, Rebecca, that will give us about 2 minutes to ponder that, because you hear that music there. Thank you, Rebecca. Hold on the line there in Amarillo. And Paula, you'll be next. We've got a couple of calls from Florida. Chris, also on the line from Florida. And one line open here, take two with Jerry and Debbie, our conversation about anxiety. 800-585-9396 lets you join the conversation.
From EWTN News Nightly in Washington, D.C., I'm Brian Patrick with your EWTN News Link. Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump will reveal his pick for vice president tomorrow. His 11 a.m. announcement in New York comes just days before the Republican National Convention starts in Cleveland on Monday. Another new poll finds Trump gaining ground on Hillary Clinton. CBS News and the New York Times finds the presidential candidates tied at 40%. That's a 3-point drop for Clinton and an increase of 3 points for Trump since last month's poll. President Obama joins a televised town hall today focusing on reducing tensions between police and citizens. He met for nearly 4 hours Wednesday with elected and law enforcement officials as well as activists. And the Conscience Protection Act now moves to the Senate after passing the House Wednesday 245 to 182. It protects organizations, companies, and employees who oppose abortion on ethical and moral grounds. I'm Brian Patrick with your EWTN News Link. Join us this evening for EWTN News Nightly.
Jesus said, love your neighbor as yourself. He was making the assumption that we love ourselves. And love is expressed in actions, not just feelings. So, do you love yourself in action? I know, the demands of life make you feel selfish when you take a break from studying or working or taking care of the kids to get, quote, me time. But when you don't care for yourself, you're leaving your loved ones with the worst version of you, tired, haggard, burnt out. And if you're a parent, what's that communicate to your kids about their dignity and worth when they learn by example that self-care isn't important? So if not for your own sake, do it for those who love you. Spend time indulging yourself in things that inspire you so you can live an inspired life and be an inspiring person. Read a good book, eat a little sushi, take a walk, watch a movie, work out, take an extra long shower. You know what? You're worth it. God thinks so. This is Chris Stefanik from RealLifeCatholic.com on EWTN Radio.
Thanks for being with us on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. Our guest today is Gary Zimak. He's an author, speaker, radio host, and has quite a bit of experience on this topic very important topic we're talking about, anxiety. And Rebecca, before the break, you were asking about what saint maybe you could ask for the intercession of or to pray to or something to lean on. Gary, would you like to answer that first?
Yeah, I have a couple that come to mind, Rebecca. The first is St. Dymphna. St. Dymphna is, for those of us who are anxious, we know all about her. She is the patron saint of those with mental disorders or anxiety. She's a good intercessor, and you can find a lot of information about her on the Internet. It's Dymphna, St. Dymphna. And the other one that comes to mind is St. Padre Pio, who is well known for his statement, pray, hope, and don't worry. I've named some of the talks and parish missions that I give for that statement. It really is a good piece of advice for us to follow. If we really are trusting in the Lord, if we really want to turn our life over to Him, we should pray, we should hope, and we should not worry because it doesn't do any good. So they're the two that come to mind for me.
I agree with you so much, Gary. I've shared so many times on the show about St. Padre Pio. That's one of the many reasons why I love him and lean on him. And he actually sits right on my desk at all times with a picture of him, a blessed picture of him. And because of that, pray and don't worry. So yes, Rebecca, great saints were given to you, St. Dymphna, St. Padre Pio, and hopefully that will help, Rebecca. Sounds good?
And God bless you always.
Thank you, Rebecca. Our phone number here is 1-800-585-9396. I just want to point out, I think what would be a great resource, Debbie, and you're familiar with this book. Gary, maybe you've seen it as well. Mother Angelica's Answers, Not Promises. It's subtitled Straightforward Solutions to Life's Puzzling Problems. And, of course, Mother went to the Lord on Easter Sunday of this year. And this book has been recently published by EWTN Publishing. And folks, it is available right now. For those, not just those going through anxiety, but for anybody who wants to just kind of navigate the road of life, make sense out of it, and realize that God is right by your side. Who better to tell you about that than Mother Angelica in her book, Answers, Not Promises, Straightforward Solutions to Life's Puzzling Problems. Here's two ways you can get the book right now. You can go to EWTNRC for Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com, or you can call the Religious Catalog phone number at 1-800-854-6316, 800-854-6316, or EWTNRC.com.
Love that book. I love the way Mother Angelica she used to speak to us in such a real way. We can understand it and just apply it immediately to our lives. So, wow, that's a great book. Okay, Sally, you've been waiting so patiently in Indiana listening to EWTN Radio. Hi, Sally. Welcome to Take Two. Sally?
Yes.
You're on.
Hello?
Hello, Sally.
Hello, Sally. You are on the air with Gary Zimac. Welcome to the program.
Yeah, I have frozen fear and panic attacks real bad, and it stops me from being able to pray, and my memory's really bad. They diagnosed me with dementia about 6 months ago. They said I had a slight case of it, and now I'm trying to get something for it, and they won't give me anything.
Gary, any just personal advice for Sally in her situation?
You know, Sally, first of all, I'll pray for you, and I'm sure all the listeners will pray for you as well. The thing that I would say is I know what you mean when you're anxious. Sometimes we just can't concentrate. And it's at times like that I like to resort to very simple prayers such as, Jesus, I trust in you, or maybe just pray the Our Father or the Hail Mary very slowly, and resort to those formal prayers that help us at those times when our mind just starts to go blank. That happens to me all the time. And I've been in situations where I've been so anxious that I can't even put the words together. And I'll just either pray a formal prayer or say, Lord, please help me. I can't even put my words together.
Well,
yeah,
go ahead.
Go ahead, Debbie.
I was just going to say, and Sally, it sounds like that you do have some medical professionals around you that you can turn to and maybe can help you with that, because there are a lot of things, if in fact that it is an initial diagnosis of dementia. I just know this because I have a family member with it, that there's a lot of things that can be done, like exercise and certain foods you can incorporate that can help with just getting by day to day to help with the memory, and also different exercises like different games that you can play to really kind of wake up the brain and get the brain to function a little better. So I would just encourage you to really seek that out with some of the medical help that you have around you, Sally, because there are some things that can really ease some of the effects of the onset of dementia, if in fact that's what it is.
I want to have it.
What, Sally?
What was that, Sally?
I don't want to have it.
You don't want to have it. Well, that's certainly understandable, Sally. And I'm going to echo what Gary said and really ask everyone listening right now, for Sally and for anyone who is experiencing the things that she's going through, the panic attacks, memory loss, the onset of dementia. So many people struggling with that. Debbie, you mentioned your family member, and it's very, very difficult. It's difficult for the person and for those who love them and try to care for them. So, Sally, from our end, what we can do is promise you our prayers, and what Debbie said I think is the best advice. Doctors are the ones who, they're trained in these areas, and it sounds like you're getting some help, and just keep knocking on doors, Sally, until you find the right resolution, whatever that may be, and just try to trust in God. It may be difficult. I know the feeling of when it feels like God is nowhere to be found, Sally, but just a friend of mine calls them prayers of the feet. Just take the next step each step is a prayer of the feet. So, Sally, bless your heart. Thank you for calling Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. You'll be in our prayers. And we're going to go now to Central Florida to Paula, who's listening to EWTN Radio on Sirius XM 130. Hi, Paula. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Jerry and Debbie. Thank you for taking my call. Hi, Gary.
Sure.
Hi, Paula. How are you?
I'm blessed, trying to stay in the air conditioning. It's very hot down here. Well, anyway, my thing that I wanted to share is I've struggled with, I guess I would have been considered a warrior as a child. I don't know if my mom would agree with that, but I can remember as far back as I can remember that I would worry about so many different things. And what happened with that is our family wasn't a family that communicated well, so I never really got to talk to anybody to try to figure out what to do with this. So I led my life as this warrior, concerned about everyone and everything, and it led into anxiety attacks. I had panic attacks and didn't know what was going on. I thought I was going crazy, and by the grace of God, throughout this long journey of most of my life, I've come to by the grace of God, the solution of placing God first, prayer, everything that you've been saying here, focusing on Jesus. Jesus, I trust in you, because if you're focusing on Jesus, you're not focusing on the fear and the panic, and it really does work. I do it every day. It's not as bad. I still have a fear of like driving places that are out of my comfort zone or places I'm familiar with, and I still place it in God's hands, and I get through it by the grace of God. I think this is going to be with me the rest of my life, but He's given me this as a blessing, I see, because it places me in a position of helplessness, almost like I have to surrender and trust in God. And it's actually a blessing in disguise, because we all need to trust in God. And this is just my way. He's placed this in my life for whatever reason, to trust in Him. I love St. Padre Pio, awesome, pray, hope, and don't worry. That right in itself could be a prayer, just saying that. And as Sally was speaking, immediately I'm saying to myself, I'm going to be praying for Sally and all those people with dementia. And then here you are, Jerry, saying the same thing. I'm just thinking, praise God for these wonderful people that just love the Lord and want to pray for those that are suffering with the different things that we suffer with, especially today as we're talking anxiety. And there is hope in the Lord. Jesus, I trust in you. He does help us.
Gary?
Oh, man, I'll tell you what, Paula, that was great. Thank you for sharing that. You are absolutely right. That's the secret. And I always like to express the opinion, and I live this in my own life. You can't worry and be talking to Jesus at the same time. Your mind can't do that. So if I'm reading the Gospels, if I'm praying, I can't be worried while I'm doing that. I think, like you, I consider my anxiety to be a great blessing, because it makes me realize that I'm not in control. There are people that don't worry, and they probably should be concerned because they don't have a relationship with the Lord. That's a big problem. So many people think they are in control, but in reality, we're not in control. The Lord's in control. And I think another thing that we sometimes forget is that when we begin to turn it around, when we start to really depend on the Lord and we walk with Him each day, and we worry less and we try to share that with other people, we'll get some resistance. People will say, well, wait a minute. Aren't you concerned? Why aren't you worrying? So sometimes I met a guy at a retreat one time that I was leading who said, if I'm not worrying, I don't feel like I'm doing my job. But there's a huge difference between concern and worry. Concern leads you to action. If I'm concerned about a problem in my life, what can I do about it? That's what I should do. I should pray about it. And if there's anything I can do, I should do it. But worry is just a useless spinning of the wheels. And it generally hits us with things that are completely out of our control. That's the thing. Those are the things we worry about. So great call, Paula. You and I are on the same page with this, and it's amazing what can happen when you take one day at a time and turn to the Lord each day.
How's that sound, Paula?
Can I add something, please?
Yeah, real quick. We got a ton of calls here we want to try to get to.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, too, for me personally, I really think the evil one is at play with this, trying to do something with my mind to say, you can't do this. I really think the evil one plays with this when people have anxiety and worry to keep us away from God.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think there are a combination of things. Gary, I'm sure you'd agree, and Debbie as well, and Paula, I'm sure you would too. The only thing I would say is I remember when I've gone through some, people know on this show, depression and anxiety. I had people say, oh, it's all spiritual attack, and other people say it's all psychological, and some people say, well, it's all physiological and chemical. And I think we have to just approach it from a holistic standpoint and try to see what all might be going on. But Paula, you make a great point. There's no question. If we are vulnerable in any area, Satan is going to try and take advantage of that. Thank you, Paula, for getting a hold of us here. Back to your calls in just a minute. Gary, how do people find out about you and get some of these resources that you have available?
Jerry, thanks for letting me mention that. The best place is my website, followingthetruth.com. I'm also available on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, and I always tell people, please get in touch with me. I really want to hear from you because I want to pray for you. I want to get you through these problems. We're all in this together. My job, and I've accepted this job from the Lord, is to bring people closer to Him. I do this full time now, and I really focus on people who are struggling with anxiety because so many people, Jerry and Debbie, are hurting out in the world. They need the Lord, and He wants to give us His peace. So, yes, followingthetruth.com is the best place, and I would welcome your emails, your messages, or whatever. Keep in touch.
Very good. Yeah, and go ahead, Deb.
I was just going to say, when I met you, Gary, the first time in New Jersey at actually Gina Rodeo's house over a wonderful Italian meal, I was sitting next to you, and I felt like there was no one else in the room. I could talk to you forever.
And I felt the same way about you, Debbie. I mean, we just hit it off. But it's true. The Lord places people in our lives, and we all, you and I and Jerry, we just want to help others to draw closer to the Lord, and to help people realize that there is no need to live your life in misery. I mean, the Lord can give us His peace, and that peace can coexist even with the most serious problems that we face.
Very good. Well, and Debbie and I have been talking about it for quite some time. I think this summer we are going to embark on preparing at least one video where Debbie and I will just sit down and share our own personal experiences of just some of the challenges in these areas that we have gone through. You've heard us mention them on the show. Some anxiety, some depression, things like that. God has been good to both of us, and we're in good places now. But hopefully it'll be something that will be able to help many, many people. So we ask all of you, first of all, please keep that project in your prayers. We think God is calling us to do that, and we will certainly let you know more about that as the time approaches. But I want to get back to your calls. So Jason and Sonia, hang on. We had Chris on the line first in West Palm Beach, Florida, listening to EWTN Radio on EWTN.com. Hi, Chris. Welcome to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie.
Hi, thank you. I'm just really enjoying listening to this show because, gosh, Gary, I do all the things that you were talking about, and many people have said praying to Padre Pio. I went through a very difficult time for the last year and a half, and it's almost coming to an end. But I did the novena to Padre Pio every day. I prayed to St. Dymphna, went to Mass every day, adoration, rosary chaplet. Anyway, it was just constant focus on God and realizing His love and mercy for Him, and just trusting that He did have a plan. And I would look back, daily and weekly over the amazing things He's done in the past and all the wonderful people He brought into my life, and kind of just prepared me for this, all along. Because if this had happened to me, 4 or 5 years ago, I probably would have wound up in the hospital. But because of how He prepared me and brought me closer and put these amazing people in my life, He really carried me through. And it's just really strengthened my faith. I used to pray, I believe, help my unbelief, increase my trust so I can have your peace. And little by little, He did. And I can honestly say I'm almost nervous to say it, but I don't have any anxiety anymore, even though the situation is still difficult. But just because of what He's done, and I just trust in His plan. And I always said, I don't know what the future holds, but I know who holds the future. And if I can just believe that and have confidence in that, it'll be okay.
That's so important, Chris, that trust that He does have a plan. He knows the future. We don't know it, but He knows the future. And that trusting in His plan, that is so critical. And I can hear it in your voice, how peaceful you are. And that's the way I feel, too. And this is not the way I lived my life before I really got to know the Lord. I don't ever want it to go back to the way it was, and I'm sure you don't either.
No.
Once you start walking with Jesus every day, life is just so much better, and you can deal with the problems because you know that he's with you.
Absolutely. Yep. That's so true.
Gary and Chris, let me ask you this question because I noticed on Chris's comments on the screen here, it says focused on God's love. And the word focus, Gary, we know that what we focus on expands. We know that what we focus on magnifies. So obviously, if we take the focus off of worry, if we take the focus off of fear, and we put the focus on God, like Chris did, that's definitely just that act alone is going to change the dynamics of the feelings that are associated with anxiety. Am I right on that?
Oh, that's exactly right. Because, Debbie, you mentioned God loves us. Well, if he loves me unconditionally, and I focus on that, well, he's only going to allow things to happen in my life that can somehow benefit. Because if he loves me, he's not going to torture me for no reason. If a tragedy or suffering comes into my life, there's a bigger reason. I might never know that reason, but if I'm focusing on his love, then I'm going to realize that, well, I don't like this, but I know this is happening because he loves me, so that's good. The other thing to remember is if I focus on the fact that God is all-powerful and that he created everything out of nothing, well, then I'm going to eventually realize that he can probably help me to get a job, or he can cure my illness or give me the grace to deal with it, because he is all-powerful. So, yeah, absolutely. The more we open up Scripture and really understand the Lord and what he can do and what he has done throughout history, the better we're going to feel because we realize that he's all-powerful and that he loves us. That's a great combination.
Mm-hmm.
Beautiful call, Chris. Thank you so much for joining us on Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. And the programs just continue, folks, all day long right here on EWTN Radio. If you're a non-Catholic or fallen away Catholic, Dr. David Anders has the very helpful and insightful answers to any questions you might have. It's at 2 p.m. Eastern Time, Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders right here on EWTN Radio. Give that a listen. I think you'll like it. Jason, thanks for your patience in Phoenix, listening to EWTN Radio on Sirius XM 130. Hi, Jason. Welcome to Take Two with Jerry and Debbie.
Hi, how are you? I was just I was calling in to talk about my own experience with OCD. So I've had it since I was I'm 43 now. I've had it since as far back as I can remember, about 11 or 12 is really where it kicked in, and it started with repetitive cycling of counting numbers and having to touch something before I could walk away. So you'd go like up to 21 was a big number, stopping at 7 like 8 or 9 times and having to say 7 over again, and just what really seems like crazy behavior. But over the years, and I recently told somebody for the first time in my life, somebody who's significant to me in a long-term relationship, and this is like 4 months ago. So up until then, I've never told a single soul in my life, and so I've always hid it out of shame, which is a whole nother story. But it's been a real process through my life to try to understand it. To me, it seems to have a big part to do with control. It ebbs and it flows. There's sometimes it's not there all the time by any stretch. It seems to be under periods of stress where it gets worse. I've tried a lot of things. The part that probably helped me the most was getting to a point in my life where I really started to come back to the faith and said, if I'm doing this as a function of control, then I'm not the one who's in control. God is in control. So how could I say that? That's just not correct. So if I'm doing this as a function and the whole point of doing it was to make sure something bad wasn't going to happen. There was this feeling of dread and feeling of doom, like something bad was going to happen or I was going to be punished just from what I don't know. But that was just the feeling and thought in my head. And so I was thinking to myself, what I'm doing by doing this is trying to take control. And if God's in control, then that's fundamentally a wrong thing. It's interesting how the brain works, because I would run into issues where then, understanding that life has suffering in it, and you're supposed to, accept and suffer with grace, essentially, and some confusion around that, and maybe this is supposed to happen, and how do I deal with that? And including up until now, I'm in a long-distance relationship, and it's a new one, and it's coming out of a bad marriage prior to this, and so having to work through some of that. Those things intertwine, I find, when you've got some things psychologically that you've got to work through that are causing stress, that are good to work through, but they kick in these things, these OCD tendencies, and boy, they can create some havoc in your life. You talk about God speaking to you. So I had an episode this weekend where I really perseverated on an idea and sent a text that I really wasn't, I shouldn't have sent, and that I had to go back and apologize for, rightfully so. And so yesterday's show, along with today's show, was really God speaking to me. So
wow, amazing.
I wanted to share my experience. The suffering part is something that I always struggle with. Is suffer with grace, but then what's the line on that? Because then we're talking about the fact that God, God's there for you. He doesn't want you to suffer, and there's always been confusion for that, for me around that.
Gary?
Yeah, Jason, you nailed it when you said when you mentioned the idea of wanting to be in control. And I think that's those of us who are anxious, we want to be in control, and the anxiety arises from the fact that we're trying to control the uncontrollable. And unfortunately, we need to accept that God is in control ultimately, as you said, and that's where the peace lies. That's where we finally have that peace. And as we grow closer to Him, you mentioned something else, that aversion to suffering. I've always been afraid to suffer myself. But as we grow closer to Jesus, and I'm sure you've discovered this too, you begin to realize how much He loves you, and you want to be with Him, and you want to follow His will for your life. And you realize that might involve suffering. And the closer you get to Him, you realize that He'll give you the grace to deal with whatever suffering comes your way.
All right, Jason?
Control thing is interesting. When I was younger, it was, at that age, it was a big divorce we were dealing with, and I think I've read some stuff about, for boys, puberty kicking in, and sometimes that being an issue, and I think it was kind of a double whammy for me. And then, another thing that you just said that's really salient is a friend of mine who was really kind of a spiritual guy early on in my life. He said, you go down this path, it's going to be a razor's edge. The closer that you get to it, the times that are tough, they're going to feel like they cut deeper. And that's certainly been true. So,
Jason, thank you for calling Take Two with Jerry and Debbie. You're really, it sounds like you're a fine man, and you put up a good fight, and God is leading you in the right direction. So thank you so much for sharing that with us here. Sonia, we promised we'd get to you in Steubenville, Ohio. Sonia, I'm going to have to ask you to share your take in about 30 seconds because we're running out of time, but wanted to get to you. Hi, Sonia. How are you?
Oh, hi. I just wanted to thank Gary for letting us know that this anxiety is something that he hasn't even completely gotten rid of, that it's something that we have to deal with on a daily basis, and for some of us anyway. And I want to tell you that I'm 82 years old, grandmother, great-grandmother, and I have been struggling all my life. But I just want to tell you that I have come to see that my anxieties have been my blessings, that it's drawn me closer to the Lord, the union, to really desire union with God, to be filled with His love, to pass His love on to others. And I could see the rewards the Lord has given me through my family, through my
Sonia,
love.
on that note, I beg your forgiveness, Sonia. I wanted to hear your brief take on that, and I'm so inspired by it. I know Gary and Debbie are as well. Gary, thanks so much. Your website again, real quick for people.
followingthetruth.com.
Beautiful. Thanks, Gary. Thanks for being with us. Hope you can join us again soon on a future show. And tomorrow is starting the day with a sense of gratitude. That's for tomorrow's Take Two. But don't forget to go to take2show.com, hit the yellow button to get to the Jerry and Debbie website, and leave your prayer intention on the prayer wall. Jerry, till tomorrow.
Till tomorrow, we wish you a beautiful and blessed day.